Welcome back to Dear Future, where creativity meets technology. I'm Suki, your guide through the evolving landscapes of innovation and artistry, coming to you from Echo Bend Studios. Today, we delve into the world of CoffeeVectors, our first artist on the show with a pseudonym who prefers to remain anonymous, and we love the mystery. He is a digital artist blending AI, 3D, and NERFs with traditional photography and video production. Using more advanced tools like Stable Diffusion, MetaHuman, and Unreal Engine 5, CoffeeVectors crafts some very stunning animations and artwork that draws inspiration from a huge array of sources, from Renaissance paintings to video games. Recognized on AI Art Weekly and 80 Level, CoffeeVectors not only produces captivating art on social, but also redefines creative workflows by integrating AI into conventional creative processes. I'm thrilled to be diving into the mind of CoffeeVectors, and I hope that we unpack the art and technology that drives his creations and you feel as inspired as I do by his work.
This idea that everything's been done before can be challenged.
I've been dreaming of a computer like this my whole life.
It really made me think more about how our brains work.
It's not coming from anywhere else. It's only coming from us.
Dear Future.
CoffeeVectors, welcome to Dear Future. Let's dive into your world.
Hello.
So
Welcome.
nice to meet you.
Did I say welcome? Oh, I'm already getting nervous.
I feel welcomed into your world.
Oh, well, that's great. That's great. That's how we're going to start on flubs and misspeaking.
Well, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you here. I tried to do some background sleuthing and was very sorely disappointed to find very little about you on the internet. I think in a world of so much identity politics, it's very refreshing to find someone who is willing to not be peacocking their own identity on social media, and someone choosing a masked identity is very interesting to me. And so as someone who only knows you through your work, which I've been following you for a long time now, I have to ask, who are you and why the pseudonym?
Yeah, so the pseudonym, funny enough, started off as just me being lazy. In my sort of quote-unquote day job, I'm a videographer, and I already have like a roster of clients I service. And I became very interested in AI, but also digital work in general with 3D and NERFs and things of that nature. And the things I wanted to explore weren't necessarily consistent with an existing portfolio I had or the clients I was servicing. And I just didn't want to try and create a coherent narrative about branding, you know? And it's sort of like if you're a DJ and then all of a sudden you're like a fancy swimmer. It's just like, how do these two things meet? And I just didn't want to have to deal with that. And so I just started off anonymous. Also, you know, I think coming into AI, I myself was not really into NFTs. I kind of came to that scene late, but I had friends that were doing very well in that space. And so I was a bit inspired by seeing all the anonymous people in that space and just seeing like, oh, this is possible. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't have to be like a branded entity, or at least a personally branded entity. And the more I got into it, I actually just started getting more and more interested in this as a kind of social experiment. Like, it's fascinating how people react. And I myself became curious, like, how far can I push this? And for example, I've had lots of meetings. I've talked to people. I've met some people in person, but even after I meet them, I still go anonymous. You know, I just don't do any video cam or anything like that.
Right.
I've only had one person actually tell me they were disturbed by that.
Wow. And what were they disturbed by?
Well, to be frank, it was someone a little older. So I don't know if that played into it at all.
Got it.
Well, you know, I might tell you this story. There's like maybe 5 or 6 reasons I'm anonymous, and they're all kind of just different. But in my videography branding, I did the personal branding stuff. You know, like I'm showing my face. I'm just like, what up, everybody? Subscribe and like and all that type of stuff. And I have friends in that space. I'm friends with influencers and, you know, we all talk about the game. And I had this one friend that was telling me about how I think in terms of mental health, it can be a bit challenging or jarring that there's always this pressure to show your life as like this big, you know, thing that is inspirational and can, you know, impress people.
To be a lifestyle influencer just by living an existence.
And I think there's a danger there in that you get incentivized to make your life bigger than it actually is. And he said something interesting to me in passing that I think partly contributed to me being anonymous, is he said, it'd be nice if you always knew that your real life was bigger than your online persona. And I thought, that's an interesting thought experiment. And this was before I got into AI. So it's just something I started thinking about, where it's just like, what if I chose not to show big things? And like, what if I only did 25% of my life as online, like as a hard rule? And I've been finding that when you are anonymous online and you don't show your persona, all your incentives and all your kind of habits for like creating some kind of an online presence are different. For example, if I go on vacation to Japan or Italy or something like that, I have no pressure to be like, check me out, I'm hanging out in this, this fancy place. Look at me hanging out in front of the Eiffel Tower. Like that never shows up. And like I only talk about AI with this name. And if I meet people, I don't feel like, oh, should I get a selfie with this person? Should I like put out that I'm hanging out with fancy people? I mean, I do my versions of that under AI, but it's been interesting. And I think also psychologically, it's fascinating because when you run up against the market and you get feedback, whether it's likes or how many views you get, it can be easy sometimes to think that it's something about your face or your body or your identity.
Right.
I would recommend, just as an experiment, for people to try to have an anonymous identity, because when you put stuff out and it doesn't do well, you can't fall back on it's my identity. Unless it's very obvious, like there's an identity in how you're speaking or, whether you're writing or something like that. But I think it's an interesting mirror back onto yourself where it's just like, oh, it's not actually me, it's the content.
Right. You get to really ground yourself in the work that you're making.
Yeah. And you also start to see what excuses you go to very quickly. Like, oh, it's my age. Oh, it's my height. Oh, it's my hair or disability or something like that.
Right.
And it might be those things occasionally, but I think it's just an interesting mirror. I think right now I'm just learning a lot from the experience, learning how people react to it. And I will say one last thing about it. Getting into AI is not just about production and creating work professionally. I really think being a human is something that's going to be different in the next decade and 2 decades. And I think already with social media, we're seeing that people are taking on multiple personas and identities simultaneously.
Right.
And a simple way to look at that is you're a LinkedIn self, and then you're your TikTok self and your Instagram self. And I have friends that play Fortnite, and it's just so funny that like they'll be playing with someone for years and they'll be like, oh, I'm a 40-year-old cop from Brooklyn, or oh, I'm a model from Paris, And I think we're right now in a stage where we have these multiple simultaneous identities always in play. But I think with AI, it's going to get much more interesting of just like, how much does my physical appearance actually have to represent me moving forward? And I think part of the anonymity is an exploration of like how human identity might change moving forward, just in the context of, I happen to be making videos and trying to get jobs and things like that. But it is really interesting to think like maybe we can start to become more fluid in terms of how different people perceive us, especially if AI shows up and I just have like a persona talking for me. Yeah, and maybe one day I'll just turn out to be an AI and you've been talking to a machine the whole time.
I always tell people I'm just a robot and they're just thinking that they're talking to a human. But imagine, really, I think the world in which we are going to be relating to identities that aren't just, human beings, but also AIs. And moving from that point of transhuman identity, I do have some questions around your life before becoming CoffeeVectors. So Coffee, before you started getting into the AI world, what was your earliest relationship to technology? And maybe the earliest indications of the work that you make today?
Video games. I was very, very interested in just storytelling in RPGs and things like that, Final Fantasy series. And I was a kid playing video games. I think that's easy to understand that you can get caught up in that. But I was very enamored with like computer graphics and animation. I didn't enter it professionally. I was in New York, and I think at the time, doing computer graphics was something where you needed expensive workstations to do.
Right. And
you sort of had to be in LA and things like that. And so it just wasn't in the cards for me given my circumstances at the time. But I've always been very interested in computer graphics, even before I started doing video. In fact, getting into video was sort of a weird thing I didn't plan to get into. My life just kind of unfolded in that direction.
Tell me about it. How did you get into video?
Yeah. Well, what I will say is when I was learning about computer graphics, it was sort of more of a general introduction to animation and the culture of animation. And I don't know if everyone would agree with this, but what I was exposed to early on was this idea that if you wanted to be a better animator, the thing you had to do was learn everything. You had to become a director, a writer, you had to learn to light, you had to become a dancer, you had to take care of dogs, you had to act. And I feel like I was very fortunate in that because I think it really set me up and incentivized me to be a Renaissance person, with this like notion in my head that I was kind of taking on blind faith that if I get better at everything, it will help me to do this storytelling thing in animation.
Including watching dogs, which is very important.
Yeah, and well, the funny thing is you hang out with dogs, you learn their behavior, you learn their quirks,
Yeah.
you learn what is not. You can tell when a cat is pretending to be a dog, and you're like, that's not really what that is, And
Yeah.
you build up these interesting instincts, and so I was always into visual things from that perspective and that area, but also creativity more generally. And I think that leads into some of how I approach AI now. Is it's a very holistic way I look at it. I really don't like being in just one set of tools or even one level or one modality of like thinking about this stuff, which can be tough sometimes because it does spread me thin. And it is a challenge, like if I'm looking at Unity and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, what's going on in Comfy UI? And then I'm watching a movie and then I'm figuring out like, oh, how would I write this character? But going back into the video question more specifically, I was finished with a certain career path I had. And I was sort of looking around like, what's the next thing I want to do? Because I think at this moment in my life, I wasn't really in a career. Even though I cared about computer graphics, like I said, I don't think I was in a place or a time or had the hardware to actually perform it. And I think it was just coincidence that I had some friends that were actors and they got me into, oh, you should do headshots. And I was like, oh, okay, what else am I going to do? And I floated into that world in New York City, so it's not like LA headshots. And I just met like this really diverse group of people. Like it wasn't just actors I was meeting. It was people who ran nonprofits. It was like, different personalities, people who needed images of their face. And you meet all these interesting characters. And that kind of just stumbled into meeting people who needed video at the time. And this was at a particular moment where DSLRs could shoot video.
Right.
That wasn't always possible.
Right.
And so I kind of, from headshots, stumbled into it. But I was lucky that because of my interest in animation, I already had like a very large and deep knowledge of imagery, but also understanding the technical aspects of imagery. Like I think if I had started photography without a 3D background, I don't think I would have known certain things. Like when you get into 3D and you're trying to make something look photoreal, you're studying very technical aspects of light. I'm here trying to remember like, oh, what is the angle of incidence for this ray? And then how does that light out? And what is anisotropy? And like all these very technical things. And so it kind of got me into a space where I started dealing with clients. I started building up a portfolio. So I think a lot of my approach to creativity is actually in dealing with clients. And I also have a variety of clients. Like most of what I did when I was doing this like very heavily was fashion. So that was a lot of the work. But I was also doing like corporate interviews, I was doing commercials, I was just doing a lot of different things. And you only need a few shoots to kind of go bad for you to really start paying attention to production.
Totally.
And you also start to realize if you don't know production well, in terms of being able to put out fires and all the chaos of things that go on, you actually can't deliver the art.
Absolutely.
And you can't deliver the vision. I've had so many bad music video experiences. It's traumatized me.
Oh, God.
And whether it's music videos or other types of videos, you really start to get a sense of, how do you produce defensively? How do you create art defensively? And I don't mean defensively, obviously, in terms of like ideas and aesthetic, but
Like a defensive driving, making sure that the other cars don't get in your lane.
Yeah, for example, a quick rule I have is whenever I go into a shoot, I think, okay, now imagine something crazy happens with the location and we lose 2 hours. What shots am I willing to sacrifice?
Right.
And being able to think that way, it gives you an ability to look at the shots that you want to get and put them into a hierarchy and be like, well, this would be a nice to have, but at the same time, like I'm willing to let it go if things don't work out.
Right. That's amazing. So you're in this place where you have been learning the business of creativity and not just I'm making art, but I also have clients, and moving from photography with clients into video. You're learning how to deliver assets. You're learning how to defensively create work. And then you hit this point at which you realize I need something different. And that's when you get into AI. But what is the transition from your work as a client-facing freelancer into the world of generative AI artwork?
It was actually COVID and seeing my friends do well in NFTs. So basically what happened is COVID happened and all jobs shut down for me.
Same here.
Right.
I was in the same boat.
Right. And it never occurred to me that I couldn't go to set. Like that wasn't even something I had considered, right? But at the same time, I had friends who were doing 3D or they were graphic designers and they were fine their clients didn't care. COVID might as well not have happened to them. And it really struck me like, oh, I need a pure digital way to like keep myself together. Because I don't know if another COVID's coming down the road, but it just made me think like it's probably smart to have a purely digital way to make money.
Right.
And then I also saw my friends like entering the NFT space, and they weren't people that necessarily were making digital work already. They sort of learned. And so it was really inspiring to see them pick up new tools, pick up new pipelines, and enter into these new networks of people that, you know, they've never met these kind of people before. They're not used to having these type of conversations. And so I kind of had a boot camp, even though I myself never really entered the NFT space. It was kind of a boot camp watching my friends. I would tell myself if another opportunity for something crazy digital showed up, I'm going to 100% do it. And it's just random luck that AI showed up at that time in my life. And I was like, great. I felt like I had taken like a multi-month course on like how to build up in a space. It just sort of landed in my lap at the right time too. I came in around Midjourney 3.
Yeah, so tell me what that moment was like. Like, I'm very curious because everyone has their inception moment. What was your wake-up call that generative AI was something you should pay attention to? What was your first day using it? Walk me through the picture of CoffeeVectors finding AI.
Well, I did attempt at the tail end of sort of, I don't know if we'd call it the NFT bubble, but I think there was certainly a time when NFTs were at their peak. I was trying to make work in that space. I was trying to figure out making NFTs. And so it was me making computer graphics. I already had some background with Blender and Houdini and things like that. Small things for people, but it never really popped off in terms of making a collection and seriously trying to put stuff into the world like that. But I was trying to figure out, okay, here's my friends doing digital art, you know, whether it's Cinema 4D or Maya or something like that. Let me try and make some stuff. And so I was already in that space. And then when AI showed up, it was very much like, oh, this is a much faster way to do some of this, right? And if you look at NFT work, it's not like photorealism. You know, it's very stylized, it's very aesthetic. And so the limitations of AI at the time weren't necessarily like a bad thing.
Right. And explain for some people who might not have been aware of the NFT bubble, so to speak, and what the look was. I'm very curious if you were to describe it for an unknowing listener who was not inside the bubble. Would you describe it as like sort of machiney or like kind of textured 3D spinning vectors? Like, I don't even have the language to describe it. So I'm curious how you would.
Well, I guess I would describe many of the projects as if they were 3D based. You know, some of them were just 2D or just even traditional artwork scanned. But a lot of it was 3D. And I would describe it as sort of 3D that isn't movie quality. You know, and maybe a little even under video game quality. And there's still ranges of it. Like some of it looked very purposefully PlayStation 1 graphics. Some of it was very aesthetic, and it wasn't really in the realm of good or bad, like, or advanced 3D. But if you looked at some of the 3D work, it would be a little under, say, like a AAA game. Like you wouldn't go look at it and think, oh, that's like Last of Us or something at that quality. I think part of it as well is usually people released NFTs as a large collection of things. Again, not all NFT projects, but a lot of it was like a large series or collection of variants. Portraits like Bored Ape.
Yeah.
I forget the names of some of the other projects. But yeah, I had friends that were doing very well in it. You know, and it's interesting for them, it was just like, holy shit, you can make money with digital stuff. Like, it was just such a revelation to them.
So with that, right, we're in the land of NFT. You start to play with AI. What happens?
It became really just an exploration of seeing how much AI I could get to be similar to the 3D stuff I was used to working with.
And what tools were you doing? What tools were you working with to accomplish these tasks, so to speak?
So early on, I would say it was Midjourney 3 and the first release of Stable Diffusion, which seems like a million years ago. But it was really just trying to make scenes, just playing around with what was possible. And it's kind of funny because the very first AI generator I used was, I think it was called Dolly Mini. So it wasn't even like Dolly official.
Yeah.
And my first prompt was so dumb. It was like a laptop running a marathon at night. I just wanted to see what he would do with that. And it made a laptop with legs and it was nighttime.
So
it was
cute.
Like running. I was like, this is amazing. You know, it was just like its ability to handle like weird requests and things like that.
Yeah.
For me, already being someone who does video and photo and has clients, I was really trying to see, could I generate assets with this? And at the time, it wasn't going to replace photography. We were talking faces that you definitely had to Photoshop to even just have them have two eyes and that sort of thing. But it was trying to figure out, like, could I at least make a background to like superimpose a person onto? Could this replace Unreal Engine as like a background thing? And trying to look at it from that perspective.
Amazing. And so you're kind of starting off in the very early days. Fast forward to now. What has changed about your process and your creative practice with these tools? What are the kinds of things that you use, and how do you balance that with your more traditional creative practices?
I'll be honest about something that radically affected me in terms of creativity. It came from a somewhat unexpected place. It was reading this book, Masters of Doom, which is about ID software and making Doom, about John Carmack and that whole thing. And it really struck me how singularly important John Carmack, who was basically the technical head of the entire thing, how like singularly important he was to the entire enterprise, and that it wasn't necessarily the creatives. You know, there was a joke in the book. They were at some point trying to get life insurance for the company, and this is past like when they were making millions of dollars. I think it was Romero who said, the only one here who matters is John Carmack. And I thought, wow, that's so fascinating. And I think what messed me up about it was it got me thinking, like, there's art, but if you can create art with difficult or new technology, that is actually something that's extremely hard to copy. And it's very much on the edge of something new. And I'm actually a really big fan of Da Vinci. I've read a lot of biographies about him. And
Da Vinci, the person, not the program.
Yeah, Leonardo da Vinci.
100%. Gotta clarify.
Yeah, I think my early exposure to animation culture of being sort of a generalist and a Renaissance person, it really naturally led me to reading about Da Vinci. And I just found it so interesting how fluid his view was between art and science, that they weren't even different things in his mind. Because that's kind of how I see things, right? Like, to me, the idea of art intersecting science, like, in my mind, they're not separate. There is no intersection, you know? In fact, I perhaps would call them both a form of communication. Going back to Carmack, I just really was thinking like the technology really matters. And in fact, you might even say there's artistry to playing with the technology, whether it's coding or something to that effect. Like, it's not just, you know, the retinal art, so to speak, the stuff that hits your eye, the stuff that makes you feel emotion. Like, I don't know, something deeply artistic to me about even the engineering on top of it. And I feel like there's a certain confidence I have with that, in the sense that I already do a lot of artistic stuff. From the outside, you'd be like, oh, that's artsy. But I feel like there's art to engineering, to mathematics, to this really technical stuff. And if you can erase these biases and predispositions of math isn't art, engineering's not art, or like paintings are art, but not these other things, I think you get into a really interesting space of being able to make some radically different stuff. And so where I'm going with that, because you had asked me sort of how things are different now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost funny what I thought was like amazing AI stuff 2 years ago. You know what I mean?
Isn't that the case for all of us? Like, looking back on our early work, and we're just like, oh God, how did I think this was amazing? Showing my mom and my brother, like, this is made with this technology. Now you think about it and you're like, God, how did I ever think this was okay?
Well, like, one of my first viral posts on Twitter was I just made an AI image of a girl blink. That's so trivial now. Like, blinking, like that anyone can make someone blink.
Right.
I have become very interested in complexity, because I think with AI, with the improving technology, and even social media, in the sense that there's way more people that are able to put their work online that maybe you wouldn't have to think about, or you didn't see their work before. I think complexity is going to be one of these things that the people that can create complex work, I mean, I feel like I have to caveat what I mean by complexity, but like, the stuff that was difficult in the past will not be difficult moving forward. I don't know, at least in the digital realm. You know, I think painting a painting is probably always going to be some level of difficult until the robots are helping us with it, I guess. For example, if I pull back from AI for a second and I just look at the video space, if you go on Instagram and you look at what people are able to do with our modern DSLR cameras, modern editing equipment, you know, meaning it's just your M2 laptop that doesn't cost like $7,000. And there's a lot of free editing software. There's just a lot of tools that are not even AI that allow you to make so much more complex work than you could have imagined 10 years ago. You would have needed like a full studio or a team of people.
Totally. Like, I totally hear that, like, the complexity of technology is growing and expanding in so many ways, but I'm still very curious. What are you doing in your craft, in your work? How are you expanding the complexity of your own creativity in your everyday work?
So a bit of a strange turn I'm taking is I'm trying to learn more about game development.
Okay.
And it's not because I want to make games. Well, I'll actually start with this. I'm very interested in what media is going to look like after AI. And I don't think it's going to be film as we know it. I don't think it's going to be photo as we know it. I think there's going to be new mediums that arise from, I like to think of them as AI first mediums. And so there may be a talk right now about disrupting Hollywood or making films as we know them with AI, but I think something more radical is on the horizon, which is media that cannot be produced except with AI. Like AI must be involved because it's so difficult to make without this tool that it's not about replacing a filmmaker. It's about, can I create a work that a filmmaker has to use a staff of intelligent agents to actually create this?
Right.
And I think part of that is in really customized, highly interactable media. Now, I don't really know what this stuff looks like because it's so speculative, but I feel like it's an exploration of what's possible. And so when I talk about learning game development, it's really getting familiar with Unity, getting a sense of what does it mean to have a media asset in front of you and you're somehow able to interact with it. And right now I'm just using game development as an entry point, but I think we're going to have very customizable things. I think it's about learning how does that even work? What does that type of experience look like? And sort of not just staying within film as we know it. Like, where could this go? One thing I kind of think about is like, what does it mean if I watch a film and like halfway through it, I'm like, I find this character really annoying and I don't know that that was the director's intent, for me to be mad about it, and then just like change them a little bit. Like,
Right.
What does that mean if that's possible? I'm sure that highly offends some people, this idea of the artist is having a vision and you should keep it sacred. But I think that partly goes to what I was saying is like, maybe it's not film. Maybe it's not a movie. Maybe it is something else with a completely different set of values and narratives about what is quality, what is sacred in that space, how is it different. And so I think I would say game development, learning more coding and trying to find more of the technical aspects for the purposes of seeing if I can make the work more varied in the sense of like, I don't think I want to put out just one thing and that's my vision. I want to put out, here's a thing, but you can play with it and you can make it your own. And then we could have like a community around it. But I'm at the very start of that. So I think it's very much an exploration, but I don't think it's about making the work of today. I'm very interested in what is art going to look like in 5 years? And in a Da Vinci sense, maybe it's not art. Maybe it is something fundamentally different, but not being afraid of that because I want to go and explore this new territory. There's a time before video games, and I think that's an example of a completely different platform that overlaps a lot with books, theater, narrative, but it is something we consider a different platform, a different medium. And so I think AI-based mediums is just something I'm very interested in and trying to figure out, like, what skills do I need to, like, develop to move in that direction?
That's beautiful. It seems like you're sort of exploring a lot of different paths that have to do less with image creation and more about world building. And I want to know a little bit in terms of that world building, what kind of things, maybe aesthetics, genres, styles are you really attracted to in the work that's being made in the world today as you build these different worlds that maybe in the future you will have people interact with, but for now might live just on a screen? Describe those worlds to me and tell me how you're building them.
I think about Into the Spider-Verse. And I think that's a good example
Great
of
movie.
a way that we might see the future as aesthetic itself becomes the alphabet of a more complex language. So you might
Right.
think, oh, I'm a watercolor painter. But if that becomes something easy to reproduce, and maybe you're not a painter anymore, maybe, like I said, it's in a different space, creating different types of work with a different value system. Maybe it's something where the ingredients are a Renaissance painting, Art Deco, anime, photorealism. Could that be the basis of a new language of a piece of work? So Spider-Verse is an example of that. It's just layers of like completely different aesthetics living into the same space. That's something I'm interested in figuring out. For example, I think even going back to the idea that I was saying about being able to customize the work to yourself and not having it only be the product of the artist. It may be like, okay, I want this movie to be watercolor right now. And I think I would interact with that world personally in a more meaningful way if I could kind of give it a little twist. I've actually also been revisiting Cubism. I never really looked deeply into Picasso, but I had this idea about like really clashing sort of like styles and ideas and like putting them into one space. And one of the ideas in Cubism is this idea of being able to see an object from multiple perspectives simultaneously. And I thought, what would it mean to look at an object or an idea from multiple aesthetic worlds simultaneously? Now, I'll be clear, this is something I'm still trying to figure out and build up. I haven't created a lot of work on it, but it is sort of the direction I'm going in that it's very much not being in one space. Like, what kind of system of ideas can we find or surface if we are starting with a multiplicity of aesthetic and a multiplicity of genres like from the beginning, and that we aren't tethered to being bound by any particular systems that we already have today?
Right. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is how we are defining a new kind of aesthetics simply by our participation with some of these tools. You know, I come from a traditional film background. I worked as a documentary cinematographer and editor and producer and sort of wearing all of the hats because New York living is expensive kind of a person. And in that role, I learned a lot about kind of what styles people would want me to shoot in, but also the styles of different kinds of narratives and editing, and learned different voices to speak through.
Yes.
One of the things that's interesting is in sort of the trends of video, let's say, is like when shallow depth of field was really cracking, you know, and everybody just wanted everything to be blurry except for someone's tiny little eyelash. And then there was kind of a phase where, okay, then there's maybe like a bounce back and people wanted really like much more almost like poppy aesthetic. Then there was another phase where people wanted it to be more like Nike's kind of like fast, multi-creative collage look that everyone was really excited about, kind of streetwear, collaged, multimedia kind of filmmaking.
Yes.
I'm noticing these trends as someone who's in the field and trying to sometimes make work that applies to that bubble and then other times really rejecting it. And I think in some ways we are experiencing certain aesthetic trends within the world of AI media making. And I'm curious, what trends are you seeing, and are you feeling particularly drawn to certain trends or maybe repulsed by them and moving in a different direction?
I think a lot of the trends right now are around the newest capabilities of what's possible. I think Flux One is kind of like a big deal. Like, oh, we can do text now. And then all of a sudden, like, oh, I got to think about this. And that's the funny thing. There's things I would like to do with AI, but it's just like the tools aren't quite there yet. And so I just have to put it on a bookshelf and wait for, you know, some close enough technology to help me get there.
And with that, just because I know we don't have all of the time in the world, I would really love to know a little bit more about your process. I'd love to know, what tools are you using and how are you using them? What are your recipes for creating with these different tools?
So I would start by saying that when I deal with someone who wants work done, I haven't done so many like pure AI projects, but I've definitely done a couple. I think it starts with what is the shot list. And based on the shot list, each shot is going to have unique challenges to it that having one particular tech stack is not going to be able to solve everything. Like, I tend to approach everything with hybrid solutions. So if AI isn't doing it, it's like, all right, I guess I got to go to Unreal, Blender, or Houdini and figure this out from there. And then if that doesn't work, it's like, all right, I guess I got to go into After Effects and green screen this with Mocha and like key it out. And so I'm very much not tethered to any particular set of tools just because I don't think it helps me actually create the work. And like I said, I think if the production doesn't work, then it gets in the way of making the art. And so I personally feel like it's really important to have a diverse skill set and have many tools at the table. Like I've certainly done some things where it was very heavy in Stable Diffusion and Comfy UI and control nets. And then there's stuff that's just like pure runway or pure like, I guess I'm just going to text prompt this in and image to image a thing. So I'm kind of in all the tools. I don't know if that's a great thing to say, but like I very much am aware of like everything that's coming out, and I'm very much on my Twitter constantly reposting stuff and paying attention. I have hundreds of bookmarks of like, all right, if I have to do this particular shot, I have to revisit this tutorial that this guy tweeted and like figure out like how this goes. And some stuff requires deep fakes, so I got to go on like GitHub and figure out a face swap. Like I have many ways to deal with potentially the same problem, and I think that's what allows me to actually be reliable to a client, because that's very important to me, like being someone that can actually deliver.
Got it. So for you right now, a lot of the AI work is sort of folding into just your normal client work. Like you're really seeing it as a business, and whatever tools come out are the ones that you're going to be using in your arsenal.
You know, I'm doing work that's pure just camera, you know, shooting as you usually do. There's some that's just like heavier on the 3D side, and then there's some that's just pure AI. And then there's these in-betweens that are hybrids. And it's funny too, because when I do client work, there has already been stuff where the video has nothing to do with VFX, but it's like, oh, I can use this AI tech stack to like solve this simple problem.
Right.
You know, yeah.
And I guess my last question for you as we move into maybe the future of a lot of these tools, what considerations do you think are important as AI becomes more prevalent in these creative industries for people like you and for those who might not even know of their existence yet?
I don't know if this is exactly what you're asking. However, I think one of the biggest issues right now with all the AI tools is they're overly focused on disruption, meaning they want to replace the entire pipeline or large chunks of it. And they're asking professionals to do things in a completely new way. And I think there needs to be much more talking about integration. Obviously, Adobe is like at the forefront of that because we're already in most of their tool sets. But most of the AI tools I use for clients, unless it's like a specific use case, is stuff that's already built into Adobe or it's just right there and it's already integrated. And I think a lot of people making AI products, there isn't enough discussion with existing professionals who are open to AI, who want to like streamline their production, but they're not really getting talked to, you know? And I think there is this interest in like, let me put out a fancy new pipeline and workflow, and I don't care how you make work today. I don't care what your pressures are. People might assume that your workflow is a certain way, but they don't realize that it's because you have to fit as a puzzle piece into a larger thing. You know, like I use this software because the rest of my team does, and I have to integrate with that. Or if I'm working in a certain way, it might be too much for me to like completely context switch into a different program. Especially like myself, I'm in between dozens of programs. And even the small change of like file open or like how to export a file as a JPEG, it's shocking how different it is from program to program. You'd think it would be like much more obvious that common things that overlap between dozens of programs would be the same. But yeah, I think there has to be a lot more talk about integration. And also I think there's a problem that needs to be addressed of infinite programs and infinite UX. It's like we can't keep making branded, siloed AI stuff and expect people to have hundreds of UXs memorized in their head. And we need some way to start converging all the tools that are coming out into some sort of custom toolbox or something that like counteracts having to learn an extra app that came out last week.
Especially with the proliferation of maybe the APIs of some of these different tools and everyone trying to make their own trained models in different ways. I think it's going to become even more saturated, let's say, until maybe we get so tired that we're like, enough, no more. And I guess maybe the last minute, is there anything that you would want people to know about you and your creative process? Anything that you would wish they would understand about you as a person when they're looking at your work?
Okay, so a lot of people talk about disruption, but what I think people aren't thinking about with the exponential curves in AI is that the crazy sci-fi future that you're imagining might become deeply mainstream and mundane much faster than you think. And,
a boring dystopia?
Not a boring dystopia. Like, for example, we think robots are going to be cleaning our dishes or something like that, right? It might be in like 5 years or 10 years, you know, if that comes to fruition, it may not. But it might be like no one cares about that anymore. Everyone's got like a dishwashing robot. And maybe that's not the greatest example. I think it's like the way people talk about AI disrupting Hollywood. That might come and go very quickly. And what I mean is your disruptions will get disrupted. Like what AI will be able to do in a year or two will look stupid compared to what it can do in 4 years.
Right.
And, you know, AI is not the only technology on the table. There's a lot of stuff happening. I mean, we're not even talking about nerfs, really. There's a ton of stuff going there. And I think it's going to be a rude awakening when nerfs like show up at like production quality and no one's been playing with them. But there's all these overlapping technologies coming out. And I think we're going to see a very different set of ideas about what's good quality. I think right now I'm trying to think about building up the skill set that I can be able to deploy in how I think things might be 3 to 5 years from now. So while I am doing completely traditional work that has nothing to do with digital, and I am playing with modern tools, I'm interested in, you know, Luma or Hydra Labs coming out with their new thing, and I'm playing with it. But I also think it's going to be different when we get to Runway 8. Like, that's not going to look anything like Runway 3, or at least it may not. You know, we're already at Midjourney 6. What does Midjourney 20 look like?
Right. And in that spirit, I have a question for you. I've never done this before, but we're going to try something different. Because the show is called Dear Future, I want you to complete the sentence. Dear Future, is there a sentence that you would want to address the future with? What would that sentence be to the future?
Dear Future, everything is temporary.
I love that. That's beautiful. Thank you for that closing thought. I wish we had more time to chat. We've come to the end of our episode. Thank you for your time and for your energy and blessing us with your wisdom. Thank you for joining us, CoffeeVectors. Having journeyed through your fascinating world, we bring today's episode to a close. To our listeners, we hope this exploration into CoffeeVectors' blend of AI, 3D, and traditional media sparks your curiosity and hopefully encourages you to push the boundaries of your own creativity. CoffeeVectors' journey is a vivid reminder that in the realm of creative process, particularly when intertwined with AI, the only limits we encounter are those we set for ourselves. As we sign off, please remember that the intersections of AI and art are not merely about the tools we employ, but about how we use these tools to reflect, challenge, and broaden our understanding of the world. I hope we all carry forward the spirit of innovation and curiosity that you, Coffee, so brilliantly embody. This is Suki bidding you farewell, but always eager to embark on the next adventure. Please keep pushing boundaries. Who knows what incredible new guests we're going to have on the show. Please stay tuned. See you in the next episode where the future of creativity awaits. Thank you all so much.
Dear Future.